The world watched with bated breath as Iran launched hundreds of drones and missiles toward Israel in a dramatic, unprecedented direct assault. For days, news channels buzzed with speculation. Was this the beginning of a full-scale regional war that could draw in the United States and other global powers? The images were startling, streaks of light crisscrossing the night sky over Jerusalem as interceptor missiles met their targets. Commentators warned of a devastating Israeli counterstrike, a cycle of escalation that could spiral out of control, and the potential for a catastrophic conflict in a region already sitting on a powder keg. The immediate fear was palpable, felt in capitals from Washington to Beijing, as leaders urged restraint and the world braced for the worst. This seemed to be the moment the long-simmering shadow war between these two adversaries finally erupted into open declared combat. Yet, as the dust settled, a different picture began to emerge, one far more complex than the initial headlines suggested. The vast majority of the incoming projectiles were intercepted. The damage was minimal. Iran had, it appeared, telegraphed its intentions, allowing Israel and its allies ample time to prepare their defenses. This was not a surprise attack designed for maximum destruction, like Pearl Harbor or 9/11. Instead, it was a highly telegraphed, almost choreographed display of military capability. It raised a crucial question: if Iran truly sought to inflict devastating harm on its sworn enemy, why execute an attack that was so transparent and ultimately so ineffective? The answer lies not in military incompetence but in a calculated political strategy. This incident pulled back the curtain on the true nature of the Iran-Israel conflict. It is a struggle waged not just with missiles and spies but with symbols, rhetoric, and carefully managed escalations. For both sides, but particularly for Tehran, the appearance of strength is often more important than the actual exercise of it in a way that would risk total war. The regime in Iran needed to show its people and its proxies across the region that it would not stand idly by after a perceived Israeli provocation, such as the strike on its consulate in Damascus. But it also desperately needed to avoid a direct, all-out war with a technologically superior Israeli military, a war that could threaten the very survival of the Islamic Republic. The result is a dangerous, high-stakes performance. It is a form of political theater where the actors fire real weapons but hope the script avoids a tragic final act. This dynamic is confusing for the outside world, which tends to see conflict in binary terms of war and peace. We are accustomed to conflicts that escalate logically toward a decisive conclusion. The Iran-Israel conflict, however, operates on a different logic. It is a perpetual, low-grade confrontation designed to be sustained indefinitely. It serves domestic political purposes for the hardliners in Tehran, allowing them to justify their rule, rally their base, and project an image of regional dominance without paying the ultimate price of a devastating regime-ending war. Understanding this performance is key to understanding the real story of the Middle East today. To truly understand the persistent tension between Iran and Israel, we must look beyond the immediate tit-for-tat exchanges. The conflict is not simply about land borders or even the Palestinian issue, though that is often the public justification. At its core, this is a clash of civilizations, a fundamental disagreement about the future of the Middle East. On one side stands Iran's theocratic regime, a revolutionary state born from the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Its identity is deeply rooted in a specific interpretation of Shia Islam, a rejection of Western influence, and an ambition to export its revolutionary ideals across the region. This worldview defines its foreign policy, its alliances, and its very reason for being. It sees itself as a bulwark against what it perceives as the corrupting forces of secularism, capitalism, and American-led globalism. On the other side is Israel, a state that, for all its own internal complexities and religious currents, is fundamentally integrated into the modern, Western-oriented world. It is a hub of technological innovation, a liberal democracy for its Jewish citizens, and a close ally of the United States. To the leaders in Tehran, Israel is more than just a geopolitical foe. It is a symbol of everything they oppose. It represents the successful implantation of a Western-style modern entity in the heart of the Middle East. Its existence is a constant implicit challenge to the Iranian model of a state governed by religious clerics. The slogan, "Death to Israel," is not just a call for military victory. It is a rejection of the political and social order that Israel embodies. This deeper ideological struggle explains why the conflict is so intractable. It is not a dispute that can be resolved through negotiation or territorial compromise, because it is about the fundamental identity and legitimacy of the Iranian regime itself. For the Ayatollahs, opposing Israel is not just a policy choice, it is an essential pillar of their revolutionary credentials. It justifies their vast expenditures on the military and proxy groups. It provides a convenient external enemy to distract from domestic problems like a struggling economy, widespread corruption, and growing popular discontent. The regime's survival in many ways has become dependent on the perpetuation of this conflict. Peace with Israel would undermine the very foundation of its revolutionary ideology. Therefore, the real engine of this conflict is the internal logic of the Iranian state. The regime's primary goal is not to destroy Israel, a task it knows is likely impossible and would be suicidal to attempt directly, but to preserve itself. It resists modernization because genuine economic and social reforms would inevitably lead to political openness. A more open, connected, and prosperous Iranian society would almost certainly question the need for a clerical dictatorship that spends its national wealth on foreign adventures, while its own people suffer. The conflict with Israel and the West is the necessary pretext for maintaining a closed, repressive system. It is a struggle for its own survival, played out on a regional stage. To grasp the theatrical nature of this conflict, one need only look at the pattern of events over the past 5 years. This period has been marked by a consistent cycle of covert strikes, assassinations, and carefully calibrated retaliations. Each incident follows a familiar script. An action, usually attributed to Israel, targets a key Iranian asset. Iran then vows severe revenge, followed by a response that is highly visible, but ultimately limited in its strategic impact. This cycle allows both sides to claim victory for their domestic audiences while carefully avoiding the tripwires that would lead to a full-scale, uncontrollable war. It is a violent, dangerous, and recurring pattern of managed conflict. The timeline begins in earnest in January 2020 with the U.S. assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, the powerful commander of Iran's Quds Force, in Baghdad. Soleimani was the architect of Iran's Proxy network, a figure of immense strategic importance. Tehran's response was swift and loud. It launched a barrage of ballistic missiles at the Ain al-Assad airbase in Iraq, which housed U.S. troops. Crucially, Iran reportedly gave Iraq, and by extension the U.S., advance warning of the attack. While over 100 U.S. service members suffered traumatic brain injuries, none were killed. Iran could claim it had taken its revenge by directly striking an American base, a powerful symbolic act. Yet the lack of fatalities allowed Washington to absorb the blow without being forced into a massive counterattack. The performance was a success. The pattern continued. In late 2020, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, considered the father of Iran's nuclear program, was assassinated in a sophisticated ambush outside Tehran, an operation widely blamed on Israel. Once again, Iran's leaders promised a crushing response. The retaliation, however, was diffuse and indirect, manifesting in increased harassment of shipping in the Persian Gulf and rhetoric-fueled announcements of advancements in its nuclear program. These actions kept the conflict simmering and demonstrated resolve, but they were not the decisive, war-starting blow that many feared. They were carefully chosen to be just enough to satisfy hardliners at home, but not enough to provoke a devastating war. This cycle has repeated itself through numerous smaller incidents, from mysterious explosions at Iranian nuclear facilities to cyber attacks and strikes on Iranian-linked targets in Syria. The most recent escalation, culminating in the direct but largely intercepted missile attack in 2024 and subsequent muted responses in early 2025, fits this model perfectly. Following an Israeli strike on its Damascus consulate, a significant escalation, Iran had to respond directly to maintain credibility. Yet, the response was a showcase, a demonstration of capability rather than a genuine attempt at annihilation. Each step in this 5-year dance has been deliberately choreographed to manage escalation, not to achieve a decisive military victory. It is a long, drawn-out war of symbols, not of conquest. The concept of performative retaliation is central to understanding Iran's strategy. It is a form of military action where the political and symbolic impact is far more important than the actual physical damage inflicted. The primary audience for these actions is not the enemy, but domestic constituents and regional allies. The goal is to project an image of strength, resolve, and defiance, thereby bolstering the regime's legitimacy and reinforcing its revolutionary credentials. This approach allows Iran to manage an unwinnable direct military confrontation with Israel and the United States, while still appearing to be a formidable regional power that stands up to its adversaries. It is a carefully calibrated act of political theater staged with real military hardware. When Iran launches a missile attack, as it did against the Ain al-Assad base or more recently against Israel, every detail of the performance is meticulously planned for public consumption. The state-controlled media broadcast dramatic footage of missiles soaring into the night sky. Officials issue thunderous declarations of victory and vow that the era of hit-and-run is over. The message sent to the Iranian people and to proxy groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen is one of power and unwavering commitment. The regime is seen as fulfilling its promise to avenge any attack and defend its honor. This narrative is crucial for maintaining morale among its supporters and ensuring the loyalty of its regional network of militias. However, behind the curtain of this public performance lies a quiet, pragmatic calculation of risk. Iranian leaders are acutely aware of their military and economic limitations. A full-scale war with Israel, likely involving the United States, would be devastating. It could lead to the destruction of Iran's critical infrastructure, the collapse of its economy, and potentially the end of the clerical regime itself. Therefore, performative retaliation is designed with built-in limitations. Attacks are often telegraphed, as we have seen, or they target empty or low-value locations. The objective is to create the spectacle of a powerful strike without crossing the threshold that would trigger an overwhelming and unbearable counter-offensive. This strategy is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it has been remarkably successful in allowing Iran to navigate a dangerous geopolitical landscape for years, challenging its powerful foes without inviting its own destruction. It has solidified its image as a leader of the axis of resistance. On the other hand, it creates a constant state of tension and instability. Each performance carries the risk of miscalculation. A missile could slip through defenses and cause mass casualties, or an adversary could decide to call the bluff and respond with disproportionate force. The line between a controlled performance and a catastrophic, all-out war is perilously thin, and Iran is constantly walking that tightrope. Iran's reliance on a network of proxy forces across the Middle East is a cornerstone of its foreign policy and a clear extension of its strategy of managed conflict. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, various militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen are not merely allies, they are instruments of Iranian statecraft. By funding, training, and arming these groups, Tehran is able to project power and influence far beyond its own borders. It can challenge its adversaries, primarily Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States, on multiple fronts, without engaging in direct state-on-state warfare. This provides a crucial buffer, allowing Iran to wage its shadow war at arm's length, thereby minimizing the risk to its own territory and regime. The use of proxies serves several strategic purposes for the Iranian regime. First and foremost, it provides plausible deniability. When a proxy group attacks a United States base in Iraq or fires rockets at Israel, Iran can officially deny direct involvement, even if its role as a sponsor is an open secret. This complicates the retaliatory calculus for its enemies. Attacking Iran directly in response to a proxy's action is a major escalatory step, one that many nations are hesitant to take. This strategic ambiguity allows Iran to stir up trouble across the region, bogging down its rivals in low-grade conflicts and draining their resources, all while maintaining a veneer of non-involvement. It's honestly a cost-effective way to wage asymmetric warfare against more powerful conventional militaries. Furthermore, this proxy network is essential for the regime's domestic legitimacy. By positioning itself as the leader of a pan-regional axis of resistance, Tehran burnishes its revolutionary credentials. It portrays itself not merely as a nation-state but as the vanguard of a movement dedicated to resisting Western and Israeli influence in the Muslim world. This narrative is a powerful tool for rallying its base of hardline supporters and justifying the immense financial cost of its foreign policy. The successes of its proxies are celebrated as victories for Iran itself, reinforcing the idea that the Islamic Republic is a powerful and indispensable player on the world stage. For a regime facing economic struggles and internal dissent, this external validation is invaluable. However, this strategy is not without its own significant risks and consequences. By empowering these non-state actors, Iran contributes to the weakening of state institutions in countries like Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. It fuels sectarianism and perpetual instability, creating vast ungoverned spaces where extremist ideologies can flourish. While these proxies serve Iran's interests in the short term, they prevent the emergence of stable, prosperous neighbors, trapping the entire region in a cycle of conflict. Moreover, Iran does not have perfect control over its proxies. These groups have their own local agendas and could potentially take actions that drag Iran into a wider conflict against its will. The proxy strategy, while clever, is a dangerous game that perpetuates the very instability that threatens everyone. Beneath the visible conflicts of missiles and militias lies a deeper, more profound struggle that will ultimately determine the future of the Middle East, the battle between modernity and theocracy. Modernization is not simply about acquiring new technologies or building gleaming skyscrapers. It is a comprehensive process of social, economic, and political transformation. It involves opening up economies to global trade and investment, fostering a vibrant private sector, empowering women, expanding access to education and information, and developing accountable political institutions. It is a force that by its very nature, challenges traditional hierarchies and closed systems of thought. It promotes individualism, critical inquiry, and a focus on worldly prosperity over ideological purity. For a regime like Iran's, which is founded on the principle of theocracy, rule by religious authority, modernization represents an existential threat. The Islamic Republic's legitimacy rests on the claim that its clerics possess a unique divine wisdom to govern, a claim that is inherently at odds with democratic principles of popular sovereignty and individual rights. A truly modern Iran, with a dynamic, globally connected economy and a well-informed citizenry, would inevitably begin to question the rationale for clerical rule. Why should a small council of unelected jurists have veto power over all laws? Why should the nation's resources be funneled into foreign proxy wars instead of domestic development? These are the dangerous questions that modernization brings to the fore. The Iranian regime's resistance to the West is therefore not just a geopolitical stance but a defense mechanism against the encroaching tide of modernity. By framing the West, and Israel as its regional proxy, as a source of cultural corruption and moral decay, the regime can justify its policies of censorship, social control, and economic isolation. The internet is restricted, satellite dishes are banned, and women are policed for their attire, not just for religious reasons, but to prevent the influx of Western ideas that could undermine the ideological foundations of the state. The conflict with the outside world provides the perfect excuse to maintain a closed society, shielding the population from the transformative influences that could lead to demands for fundamental political change. This creates a tragic paradox. The Iranian people, particularly the young and educated urban population, yearn for the benefits of modernity. They want better economic opportunities, greater social freedoms, and a normal relationship with the rest of the world. We see this desire expressed in waves of protests, in the vibrant online culture that persists despite censorship, and in the brain drain of talented Iranians leaving the country. Yet, the very structure of their government is designed to resist these aspirations. The regime is caught in a bind. It needs some economic development to prevent total collapse, but it fears the social and political liberalization that genuine, sustainable development requires. This internal battle between the forces of modernity and the dictates of theocracy is the central drama of contemporary Iran. How has a regime like Iran's been able to resist the powerful global currents of modernization for so long? The answer lies in two formidable pillars that prop up the Islamic Republic: a deeply entrenched revolutionary ideology and the immense wealth generated by oil. These two forces work in tandem, allowing the state to finance its ambitions, enforce its will at home, and insulate itself from external pressures that have forced other authoritarian states to reform or collapse. They provide the regime with both the justification for its actions and the means to carry them out, creating a resilient, if brittle system of rule that has endured for over 4 decades. The first pillar is ideology. The 1979 Islamic Revolution was not just a political coup, it was a profound ideological upheaval that installed a unique system of clerical rule known as Velayat-e-Faqih, or guardianship of the Islamic jurist. This ideology provides the regime with a powerful, non-negotiable source of legitimacy. It posits that the state's authority comes from God, not the people, and its primary mission is to protect and expand Shia Islam. This worldview is propagated through the state-controlled education system, the media, and the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It creates a dedicated cadre of true believers who see the regime's survival as a sacred duty and view any compromise with the West as a betrayal of core principles. This ideological fervor provides a powerful defense against calls for secularism or liberal democracy. The second pillar is oil. Iran sits atop some of the world's largest proven reserves of oil and natural gas. This resource wealth gives the state a significant degree of autonomy from its own society. Unlike governments that depend on taxing a productive private sector, the Iranian regime can fund itself by selling natural resources on the international market. This revenue stream allows it to finance its vast security apparatus, its military, and its network of foreign proxies without needing the consent or economic productivity of its own population. It can provide subsidies and patronage to key constituencies to buy their loyalty, all while neglecting broader, sustainable economic development. Oil money acts as a powerful tool of social control, enabling the regime to weather economic sanctions and internal discontent. These two pillars reinforce each other. The oil wealth funds the institutions like the Revolutionary Guard that are the primary guardians and exporters of the revolutionary ideology. In turn, the ideology justifies the state's control over the nation's oil wealth, framing it as a resource to be used in the service of its grand geopolitical mission, rather than for the mundane prosperity of its citizens. This symbiotic relationship creates a formidable barrier to change. It allows the regime to maintain its resistance economy, prioritizing ideological goals over economic integration and efficiency. While this model has led to stagnation and suffering for the average Iranian, it has proven remarkably effective at ensuring the survival of the clerical elite and their grip on power. While the strategy of performative retaliation and proxy warfare has allowed Iran to project power and survive, it is fraught with immense dangers and inherent limitations. Relying on violent rhetoric and non-state actors creates a regional environment of perpetual instability where, honestly, the risk of miscalculation is ever present. The language of wiping Israel off the map or promising severe revenge may play well for a domestic audience, but it also paints the regime into a corner. When a crisis erupts, the regime is compelled to act on its threats to maintain credibility, pushing it closer to the very direct conflict it seeks to avoid. This dynamic makes the entire region a tinderbox, where a single spark could ignite a devastating fire. One of the greatest risks is the potential for unintended escalation. The battlefield in the Middle East is crowded and complex, with numerous state and non-state actors operating in close proximity. A missile fired by a proxy group in Iraq could accidentally kill a significant number of American personnel. A drone launched from Lebanon could evade Israeli air defenses and strike a sensitive target, causing mass casualties. In such a scenario, the carefully constructed rules of the game would shatter. The pressure on the United States or Israel to respond with overwhelming force would be immense, potentially bypassing the Iranian buffer of plausible deniability and striking Iran directly. The line between a managed theatrical conflict and a real catastrophic war is, honestly, dangerously thin. Another significant peril is the corrosive effect this strategy has on the region. By funding and empowering militias, Iran actively undermines the sovereignty and stability of its neighbors. In Lebanon, Hezbollah operates as a state within a state, preventing the country from forming a functional government and holding its economy hostage. In Iraq, Iranian-backed militias challenge the authority of the central government and perpetuate sectarian violence. In Yemen, the Houthis have plunged the country into a devastating humanitarian crisis. While this chaos serves Iran's short-term goal of bogging down its rivals, it creates a swath of failed or failing states on its borders, breeding extremism and ensuring that the region remains mired in conflict for generations to come. Ultimately, this strategy has a finite shelf life. It is based on a gamble that Iran's adversaries will always choose restraint. As Israel and its Arab partners in the Abraham Accords grow closer, and as the world's patience with regional instability wears thin, that gamble becomes, well, increasingly risky. Furthermore, the strategy is economically unsustainable. The billions of dollars spent on foreign proxies are billions that are not invested in Iran's own crumbling infrastructure, struggling industries, and impoverished population. This trade-off fuels domestic resentment and delegitimizes the regime from within. The politics of resistance and proxy wars may be a clever tactic for survival, but it is not a viable strategy for long-term national prosperity or regional peace. There is a profound and widening gap between the ambitions of the Iranian regime and the aspirations of the Iranian people. The government in Tehran is animated by a grand ideological vision. It seeks regional hegemony, the export of its Islamic revolution, and a perpetual struggle against the United States and Israel. Its leaders speak the language of martyrdom, resistance, and apocalyptic confrontation. Their priorities are reflected in the national budget, with vast sums allocated to the IRGC, the nuclear program, and foreign proxies. For them, success is measured by influence in Damascus and Baghdad, by the number of rockets Hezbollah possesses, and by their ability to defy the international community. This is a vision focused outward, on power and ideology. In stark contrast, the desires of ordinary Iranians are largely focused inward. They are preoccupied with the daily struggles of life under a mismanaged economy, crippling sanctions, and stifling social restrictions. They want stable jobs, a currency that holds its value, and the ability to provide for their families. Young Iranians, who make up a huge portion of the population, yearn for greater personal freedom, access to unfiltered information, and the opportunity to connect with the wider world. They watch as their peers in neighboring countries like the UAE and even Saudi Arabia experience social and economic liberalization, and they wonder why their own future is being held hostage by the ideological obsessions of an aging clerical elite. Theirs is a desire for normalcy, not revolution. This disconnect manifests in recurring waves of popular protest. Unlike the Green Movement of 2009, which was largely political and centered in the middle class, the more recent uprisings have been driven by economic desperation and have spread to working-class Iranians across the country. Chants that once focused on specific political grievances now frequently include slogans directly challenging the regime's foreign policy, such as, "Not for Gaza," "Not for Lebanon," "My life for Iran." This reflects a growing public awareness that the nation's wealth is being squandered on foreign adventures while citizens at home suffer. The regime's axis of resistance is seen not as a source of pride, but as a drain on their own well-being. The government's response to this internal dissent has been brutal repression, further alienating the population. But force alone cannot solve the underlying problem. The regime can imprison activists and shut down the internet, but it cannot extinguish the fundamental human desire for a better life. This internal chasm is the Islamic Republic's greatest vulnerability. While the world's attention is fixed on the dramatic theater of missile strikes and proxy wars, the real long-term threat to the regime's survival may come from its own people. The government's relentless focus on external conflict is, in part, a desperate attempt to distract from its profound failure to meet the basic needs and aspirations of its population. Despite the best efforts of authoritarian regimes to hold it back, modernization is a relentless and powerful force. It moves forward, often slowly and unevenly, but its direction is unmistakable. The tools of modernity, technology, global commerce, and the free flow of ideas are inherently disruptive to closed, hierarchical systems. A government can build firewalls, but it cannot stop the spread of satellite internet. It can ban Western films, but it cannot erase the desire for personal expression and entertainment. It can preach an ideology of ascetic resistance, but it cannot eliminate the human aspiration for prosperity and comfort. The Iranian regime's struggle against modernity is, in the long run, a losing battle. The digital revolution is a key driver of this unstoppable change. Even in a country with significant censorship like Iran, young people find ways to access global culture and information through VPNs and social media. They see how others live, they exchange ideas, and they form communities outside the control of the state. This exposure to the outside world inevitably erodes the official ideology. It becomes harder to convince a young person who follows global fashion trends on Instagram that Western culture is purely evil and corrupt. It becomes more difficult to sustain a narrative of national sacrifice when the internet is filled with images of peace and prosperity elsewhere. Technology is a solvent that dissolves the glue of authoritarian control. Economic realities also push societies toward modernization. A state can survive for a time on oil revenues, but this model is unsustainable in the 21st century. True, lasting prosperity comes from a diversified, innovative economy that unleashes the talents of its people. To achieve this, a country needs to integrate into the global financial system, attract foreign investment, and foster a competitive private sector. All of these steps require transparency, the rule of law, and a stable political environment. The very things the Iranian regime's ideology rejects. As the oil-funded patronage system becomes more strained, the pressure for real economic reform will become irresistible, and with economic reform comes the demand for social and political change. We have seen this story play out in other parts of the world. South Korea, Taiwan, and Spain were once authoritarian dictatorships that eventually transitioned to open democratic societies as their economies developed and their middle classes grew. Even in the Middle East, we see nations like the United Arab Emirates making a deliberate pivot toward a post-oil future based on trade, tourism, and technology, a path that has required a degree of social liberalization. While Iran's ideological foundation makes its case unique, it is not immune to these powerful historical forces. The desire for progress is universal, and no wall, physical or ideological, can keep it out forever. The march of modernization may be slow and contested, but it is ultimately inevitable. The ongoing conflict between Iran and Israel, with its dramatic but often performative displays of force, is a symptom of a much deeper struggle. It is the outward expression of a regime in Tehran that defines itself through resistance to the West, to Israel, and most fundamentally, to the forces of modernity itself. Its strategy of proxy warfare and controlled retaliation is a clever but dangerous attempt to maintain this revolutionary identity and project power without triggering a suicidal war. But this path only guarantees perpetual instability, trapping not only Iranians but the entire region in a cycle of violence and stagnation, sacrificing the well-being of its people for the survival of an ideology. Lasting peace in the Middle East will not come from a new treaty or another temporary ceasefire. It will come when the underlying drivers of the conflict are addressed. The most powerful and enduring force in the world today is not identity politics or religious extremism, but the universal human desire for peace, stability, and a better life. The politics of identity, which thrives on grievance and eternal conflict, can mobilize a passionate minority, but it cannot build a prosperous and inclusive society. It offers only endless struggle, whereas modernization, for all its challenges, offers a path toward progress, opportunity, and integration with the world. The real hope for the region lies not with the generals and the clerics, but with the ordinary people who are increasingly weary of conflict. It lies with the young Iranians who risk everything to demand more freedom, the entrepreneurs who want to build businesses, and the families who simply want a normal future for their children. Their interests are aligned not with the axis of resistance, but with the nations that are choosing development over destruction. The path forward requires a move away from the politics of revolutionary identity and toward the pragmatism of nation building. Ultimately, societies that embrace openness, trade, and progress tend to become more stable and peaceful. Those that remain closed, resentful, and fixated on old grievances are destined for conflict and decline. The theatrical war between Iran and Israel will likely continue in some form as long as the regime in Tehran prioritizes ideological struggle over the welfare of its people. But the forces of modernization are quietly at work, eroding the foundations of that ideology. The future of the Middle East will be decided not on the battlefield of missiles and drones, but in the contest between two opposing visions, one of perpetual resistance and one of peaceful progress. History suggests that, in the end, progress will win.